Hello, everybody. Uh, Welcome particularly to Argha Manna, artists in residence at IIT Gandhinagar, as our speaker artist for the day. I don't know whether we should refer to him as artist speaker or speaker artist, which comes first, but we can have that discussion at a later point. And to all the others who have come in for our series Drawing Vulnerability, being organized by the UNESCO Chair in Vulnerability Studies in collaboration with Indian Writing in English Online, which is, as some of you might know, the world's first open educational resource for Indian Writing in English, an IOE project at the Department of English, University of Hyderabad, whose principal investigator, Professor Anna Kurian, is unwell and unable to join us even today. The chair, as some of you are aware, is mandated as and designed as a teaching and research unit to offer courses and programs connected to the broad theme of vulnerability. We've had a roundtable theorizing vulnerability, and as part of that continuing mandate, we have done one-off talks. We have had a series of in-house screening of films on the broad theme of vulnerability, and drawing vulnerability in the 30th year anniversary year of Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics has brought together practitioners and academics to discuss one specific genre and form, and that's the graphic novel or comics, and to discuss how form determines the kind of vulnerability that is emphasized, and what options, choices does the form give. So we have a mixture of academics, one of whom is here with us today, Professor Susan Square, and our artist for the day, Argha Manna. Welcome to all of you, and over to Atul and Meenakshi for the rest of the computer. Thank you.
Hello, Mr. Manna. Before we proceed with the talk, may I formally introduce you to the audience? Though it is quite true that you really do not need an introduction because a lot of the audience are regular readers and fans of your work. But even then, the occasion demands that I formally introduce you. So, Mr. Argha Manna is a comics artist and the artist in residence at IIT Gandhinagar. He calls himself a cancer researcher turned artist on his website, which is called Drawing History of Science. He has experimented with Professor Lydia Boriba from MIT on translating the fluid dynamics of disease transmission into comics form, and this collaboration resulted in a piece called Be Aware of Bubbles and Droplets for the Annals of Internal Medicine and was featured in the Graphic Medicine Best of 2020 list by the JAMA. Presently, Argha is writing a comics book on ant network theory, co-evolution, and planetarity, working on a project on Indian women in science, which is in collaboration with Sci Illustrate in Munich, and Climate Change Challenge in collaboration with the Center for Cellular and Molecular Biology, CCMB, in Hyderabad, and Archives of the Earth in collaboration with Dr. Amelia Bonia of the University of Heidelberg. Today, he will deliver a talk titled Drawing Famine in the Time of Pandemic, reflecting on his latest work, which is Famine Tales from India and Britain. And with this, may I invite Mr. Argha Manna for his talk, please.
Yeah, thank you so much. First of all, thank you, Professor Nair, and the entire team for inviting me to speak in such a beautiful talk series. I'm so much honored because many senior artists like Katie Vance, Arijit Sen, they are presenting, and other scholars also. So today I'll be talking about one of my recent project which got published, but we have been working on this project since 2019, just before the pandemic hit us. And it was a project, like I'm making my slides full screen, but the problem is when I'm making it full screen, I cannot see you. So let me go through the slides, then I'll answer your questions and we'll discuss. So right now I'm making it full screen so that, just a minute. Yeah. So here's the one drawing I made for a podcast series. I'm coming into that. So drawing famine in the time of pandemic is about a project we got commissioned from University of Exeter. They started a project documenting famine, making a digital archive for famine. This is the screenshot of that project, Famine and Dearth in India and Britain. So it was led by Professor Ayesha Mukherjee from University of Exeter, and it was collaborated by the Digital Humanities Lab. So this is a beautiful archive. Like in India and Britain, since the time of Mughals, they came across different documents. Almost every document is available written in every language. Every language means like English, Bengali, Farsi, and others language at the time, Urdu, and some Hindi poetry also. So then they converted that archive into a brilliant project, which is Famine Tales from India, Britain. So the project objective was that a couple of artists, including me, and the traditional Pottochitrakars from Bengal. So here you can see one of the the images of Dukhusham Chitrakar, who just suddenly passed away last year. So the project was we had to convert or translate the documents or information from the archive about famine into comics and in Pottochitro, the traditional scroll painting. So this was the whole project. So there are other artists also. So there are several wings of that project, and we are documenting different kind of story. Like one is Bidrohi Captain Pouch or Rebel Captain Pouch. This is one of the story. From Britain, and Chiattorer Manantar, which I did in collaboration with Mr. Dev Kumar Mitra, which is the Great Bengal Famine from 18th century. Another is Kangaler Gan, which is a Bengali song actually, and it's about hunger and the dearth of food. Another was Mundi Sahib's Golpo, or the Tale of Mundi Sahib. So here's it is a story about Peter Mundi. He documented the famine from Gujarat, and it was done by another eminent animator or comics artist from India, who is Shekhar Mukherjee, who is now serving as a director of National Institute of Design at Hyderabad, Telangana. Another was Shekhobhirer Deshe Durvikho, which is another Bengali story, and here you can see all the Pottochitrakars did the story using colors made from natural resources. So these are the overview of the project. Today I will talk specifically about what I did on Chiattorer Manantar of the Great Bengal famine in the form of comics, and I will talk about little bit about history of famine and how we came to the story and what was our journey, and why I made the title like Drawing Famine in the Time of Pandemic, because pandemic made a huge impact on our storytelling and on us also. So, okay, let's begin about the Great Bengal Famine 1770, which in Bengali, like in our language, in Bengal, it's infamously known as Chiattorer Manantar. That means the Chiattor is coming from the 11,076, the Bengal year. So, and the English year was 1770. Just a couple of years after the Battle of Palasi, when the Nawab Sirajdollah lost that battle, and in Indian history, this was a very pivotal moment because he was lost to Robert Clive, the general appointed by East India Company, and many historian and the scholars consider this moment as a moment when actually India get into the grip of East India Company and then British government. So here is the Professor Ayesha Mukherjee, who was the project principal investigator of the project, the Famine Tales project, and I wrote a blog together in 2020 for British Library, which was Hunter Campbell and the Politics of Archiving Famine. Now the thing is, William Hunter, he was a historian and a British official appointed in Birbhum Shuri in Bengal, but he was from 19th century. Okay, so and he wrote a book, which is a very famous book, it's the Annals of Rural Bengal. It was about Bengal famine happened in 18th century. So, of course, William Hunter never experienced the Great Bengal famine. Like as a historian, he investigated all the documents available in the British office, and he wrote a book. But the interesting thing is, at that time, actually, when India was under the grip of British or the East India Company, almost every year there was this famine. Like within a decade, there were 50 or 60 famines. So when Hunter was writing that book, there was a famine in Odisha, the infamous famine in Odisha. It was around 1860 to 1817, between that time. And he was appointed in Shiuri, Birbhum, and using his Victoria, the name of the vehicle is called Victoria. So he used to travel from Shiuri to the Midnapur border. Midnapur is a district in West Bengal state, and the Midnapur and Odisha border, the actual famine was happening. So he used to travel there, and he was writing that book. So he was experiencing the famine, which was not the actual big Great Bengal famine or 1770, but the famine from 19th century. And in the light of that experience, he was writing the book on Bengal famine. Another important figure was George Campbell. George Campbell was a British official. He was the head of the Famine Commission, appointed by the East India Company and the British government. So he wrote one report, which is very important report, but of course, he was not a historian, so he wrote everything like in favor of the British government, and it was full of data, only the data. He was not digging into the story, or he was not even not interested in about the demography, the people, their religious belief, and other things. Many things actually. Famine is such a heinous, like it's a big event. Many people die in famine wherever it's happening. So, as a historian, what William Hunter was doing, Campbell do that. So we wrote that blog together, and these are the portrait and the image I drew for the British Library. And also rural Bengal was our primary source to know about the Great Bengal famine. So here's the prologue, like what was happening and why famine happened. So in 18th century, of course, it was the time when the glory of the great Mughal Empire was in decline. And there are still several battles. One battle was the Battle of Palashi, then battle of Buxar. So all those battles were Indian Nawabs, they were losing. And the big players in India, like the Nawabs from Nawab of Hyderabad, the Nizam, and the Nawab of Bengal, Siraj Dowla, and the other big players who were supposed to report to Delhi at that time, they were losing to the East India Company. And in fact, they became the puppet of East India Company. So this was the background, the backdrop when the India or the Bengal and the other provinces was heading towards famine. So another important event, perhaps the most important event in Indian history, Indian colonial history, was the transfer of the Diwani rights. So Diwans were in Jamindar, they the tax collector. Say they used to collect tax and they transferred the tax to the Nawab, to Delhi. So East India Company became suddenly the Diwans. They got the right to collect that tax. So Rabindranath Tagore also wrote about that, how the East India Company, they were the businessmen, they suddenly became the rule makers. So Tagore extensively wrote about that. So after just a couple of years, so the transfer of Diwani was happening in 1764. Just after 6 years, the Great Bengal famine happened. Okay. But the problem is, okay, this is the prologue, the backdrop of the story. But when we got commissioned to draw the famine, draw a comics about famine, we faced several problems. Which is, first of all, our primary source, William Hunter, who never saw Bengal famine. So it was a historical document, kind of historical investigation with some imagination, like what he was experiencing from the actual Odisha famine, which happened in 19th century. Then we, I and my collaborator Dev Kumar Mitra, we collaboratively did that comics. We also never saw crisis like famine. We at least claim that we are from semi-privileged family. Whenever we asked food, at least we got that food on our table. So we never saw a famine-like crisis, and so except reading about it. So since we had to draw it, not write about that, so we were not getting feelings about famine, how to draw the famine. And no British or other European artist drew anything about 18th century famine in Bengal. And there is no visual record. So it was a good thing for us, like there was an open field in front of us, we could do anything. But again, like it's kind of a double-edged sword. Like we had to like we were interested to become truthful to our image making, but we are not getting any kind of visuals. And we didn't want to copy artists like Chitta Prasad and Jawani Labidin, who extensively documented famine in visual form during 1943, when it's called Churchill's famine. But we are not interested in copying their artwork. So like their documentation is mostly on how famine affected the human body and the whole population. Like, but we were more interested to find out the reason behind famine. So here's the problem, like a one graphic depiction of the problem. Like we, first of all, we were dealing with 3-century timeline. Like here, this is me, and this is Devuda, this is Dev Kumar Mitra. So we are collaborating on that. We are reading from Hunter's book. And we are looking to the famine from 21st century lens. Hunter was looking at the famine from 19th century lens, and he was writing a book on a famine which happened in 18th century. So this was the problem. Like we had to really 3-century timeline. So we did some modification in our storytelling. We brought some improvisation. I'm coming into that. So this was the like very complex thing we are dealing with, and we are not interested in drawing like dead bodies, rather interested in finding out why famine happened. Even then, pandemic came actually in 2019, and in like I guess April, 24th April, our Prime Minister announced lockdown. So we are just in the beginning of our project. So, and this is a visual representation of my humble studio in my home. So I was drawing famine, and accidentally Dev Kumar Mitra, he is a visiting professor at National Institute of Design. He went there for teaching, and he was stuck there. So actually he was unable to help me in drawing and writing, but we were like every day we are having conversation over telephone or Zoom meeting. But we are on our own, 2 different places, sitting at 2 different places. So here, like what I have drawn, what I was experiencing sitting inside in my room. So like there is no need to mention that what was happening at the time. All migrant workers were on road. Here you can see I have drawn that like I'm watching TV. And here I am sitting in front of my drawing board. So if you are I'm a big fan of Art Spiegelman. So if you have read Mouse and other Art Spiegelman drawing you have seen, so this is kind of, I was trying to pay tribute also to him, like he documented on Holocaust. So almost I was observing, or I was seeing Holocaust level people death on road. So this was the time when I started drawing famine. Then actually at that time, I was an employee at ABP News, and their Bengali newspaper is called Ananda Bajar Patrika. I was a sub-editor there. So our office was about to close because of the pandemic. So I decided one thing. So the famine story was in my mind, like I had to draw a famine story. But then my journalistic avatar came out, like before the lockdown, or before closing our office, why not interviewing some people who were like migrant workers who from the local villages came to Calcutta. Calcutta is a big city in eastern India. From the local village and the district, many people come on daily basis and they stay there, but they do not have proper living condition. And the small businessman, what was their fear? What was their anxiety? So I started interviewing that. It was huge risky thing because already COVID was there, and every day like news of death of many people are coming. So I visited local machine shops, local small factories in the Chandni Chowk market in Calcutta, where the ABP head office is. I worked around there and I asked many people around the Howrah station. Like I worked around there and I interviewed them, and I understood that, well, perhaps 250 years ago, similar thing was happening. Like many people from different area where crops was failing because of scanty rainfall, they are trying to migrate to somewhere else. or they didn't have money to buy anything. Like I was started imagining like what the situation could be, like the vulnerability of the human. Like I was perceiving that that was quite similar. And then I was digging deeper into the historical cases, and I found that, which is very uncanny, just before the Great Bengal famine, there was a demonetization by Robert Clive, and he just withdrew some all the coins, the silver coins, and like his allegation was quite similar what was during our demonetization. Like there was corruption in making the coins, and like it is going to the wrong hand. So he did two things. One, a demonetization, just he drew all the because East India Company at that time was Diwan, already they become the Diwan, the tax collector, and the keys of the mint, it was in their hand. Like they could decide what kind of coins, what kind of money should flow in the market. So the Robert Clive did that, and it's written, it's documented by Hunter in his book. And I started really I started to understand that with, like, of course, during Great Bengal famine there was no like mm, uh, no ism in economics like communism, socialism. Of course there was no ism there, but the situation for the human life, the workers, the small businessmen was quite similar. So here I was like this comics I drew for the blog for Exeter University, and here you can see like the situation is like in every decade, uh, why and how this is similar. Like you can see the um, demarcation between the poor and the super rich. I tried to draw one super rich family and their very ugly building from Mumbai, and in front of that, the slum, and how the corporates are behaving when there is a scarcity of food. And here, the right side bottom panel, you can see like for the centuries, the condition of the migrants, this is quite similar. So this was this situation which made a huge impact on my famine drawing. So here, with this small short comics, I was trying to draw a parallel between two situations. And I found, okay, so of course, William Hunter drew a sketch through writing about Bengal famine. But what is the common model of famine in everywhere? So Professor Amartya Sen's book, the famous book Poverty and Famine, came as a very good help. And I found that famine is not only about dearth of food. It's not that the food is limited. The problem is food, the key of the food, its distribution is whose hand. And the distribution of the food is the main thing. It's not that the food is limited. Like in every country, in everywhere, in every century, like I while drawing the famine, I understood that at least there is enough food to feed the every people under that government or that geographic region. But some people, the very handful of people, very low percentage of people, they get the extra food, and rest of the people suffer. So this is the model of the famine. And the other people, like the small businessmen, the migrant workers, they are they are basically the not organized workforce, unorganized workforce from any geographic region. They suffer the most. So this was the basic model of famine. I like during pandemic, the pandemic actually taught me about famine, how to look into the famine, and we started drawing our story. So I found this is very complex. This was our notes. I and Debuda used to share those notes through WhatsApp and email. Like this is our, and we are building like how, like one famine is a like complex event. What would be we are trying to connect the dots before we start getting into the drawing phase. So we thought, okay, now it's time to draw the main comics about Bengal famine, and I divided the whole comics into 4 chapters. One is the sketchbook. I'm coming into that, why there is a sketchbook. And chapter 2 is systematic destruction of agrarian economy and artisanal culture. Third one is most important, which is an artificial crisis. Like I found every famine and every food security problem, the dearth, hunger problem arise during the pandemic in anywhere in the world was artificial. It could be solved easily. And the nature's fury, which we actually cannot evade that. But the problem was, again, like we were not interested to just translate what Hunter wrote in his Annals of Rural Bengal into a comics. So we thought, okay, uh, let's create some metafiction. We actually dealing with some metafiction. So I created one imaginary character whose name was Devdulal Mitra, who was actually Devkumar Mitra, my collaborator. Even you can see the similarity of his face. I already shown you his photograph with this character. So what I was imagining like that, okay, let's draw the famine story in this way. Devdulal Mitra is a artist, imaginary artist, and this is a dialogue between Hunter and Devdulal Mitra before Hunter wrote the book Annals of Rural Bengal. So it's not about the book of Annals of Rural Bengal. So rather, Hunter was traveling to the Midnapur and the Orissa famine regions, and Devdulal Mitra, imaginary artist from Calcutta, from that time, he was accompanying him. And in the whole comics, they were discussing what are the reasons behind famine. And after that discussion, actually, and also Rural Bengal was written by Hunter. So the Lost Sketchbook. So here the story is starting in this way. Like the story is actually when in 19th century, when famine was happening in several regions of India, especially in Orissa, it was again like it was the germination time for visual journalism. Like in 1840s, 50s, at that time, Le Petit Journal from France, London, Illustrated London News, Graphic Magazine, Punch Magazine started in 1830 or 28, I guess. I actually forgot the actual time, but these are like the graphic journalism, the visual journalism was coming out. So here, like I imagine the story something like that. Hunter, he was in Midnapur for examining the famine condition, and he called Devdulal Mitra, one artist and printmaker from Calcutta. Like I got some offer from Englishman newspaper. So Englishman newspaper was also started publishing at that time. So I want, like, can you draw some illustration for me? So but that have to be real, like Illustrated London News. So that's why I invited you. So can you come here? Because nobody ever had documented famine in visual form. It was that dialogue. Then Devdulal Mitra told him, no, it's not true actually. There was some obscure artist who traveled around the Bengal during Great Bengal famine, and he documented the famine in Bengal province, like from Dhaka, from Murshidabad, and from Dhaka is now in Bangladesh, Murshidabad in West Bengal, then Patna, and Calcutta also. Like he traveled around the Bengal during famine, and he documented, like he was a comics journalist or visual journalist at that time. But of course, there was no printing process at that time, or there was no such newspaper. So his sketchbook was obscured. But somehow I got that sketchbook. So here is the self-portrait of that artist. So I was imagining like I was that obscure artist, and Devdulal Mitra was Devkumar Mitra. So they were discussing, and Devdulal Mitra is showing him the sketchbook. So here, like this is this panel is the last panel of that book, of that comics. So you can see, like I redraw all the front pages of those journal who actually documented famine in 19th century. And somehow, like after the whole story, they discussed about the making the comics, and his sketchbook, his like Devdulal Mitra sketchbook, and the old sketchbook, which was drawn by some obscure artist, nobody knew his name. It was lost. So actually I was here separately, like I was drawing the comics, and I separately created one folded sketchbook. It's to a 12 feet long sketchbook in which actually that obscure artist documented Bengal famine. So I'm showing you some image, that obscure artist, I mean, I drew that. These are like different events. and I tried to document the animals and the birds also. And here you can see like jamindars and nawabs, the local nawabs at that time, they used to loot the rice and the grains from the farmers, because of course there is scarcity of food. So key was in like every food will be in their palace and their houses, because other people, they wouldn't get the rice and the grains. And this is very important. Like if you can notice at the corner, I have done some people who are infected by pox. So when famine in anywhere in world it happens, disease like pox also happen hand in hand. So during Great Bengal famine, pox basically devoured a section of Murshidabad, and they are the youngest Nawab, perhaps he died also. So here you can see like this is the scene um, from upper side to the lower side, like from Murshidabad, from Dhaka, from Patna, and from Calcutta. So here, this is my planning sketchbook, like how to draw that place, how to draw that places. And if you notice, like I have drawn just like Joe Sacco do that, like he put himself in a scene. So here the artist is also documenting the whole famine, and he was traveling around the Bengal. So of course this was imaginary, but through imagination, like I was trying to bringing that sketchbook, or Devdulal Mitra was trying to bring the sketchbook in front of Hunter. Now let's come to the systematic discussion. So after that discussion, they started traveling around the Orissa, and the whole comics is about they started discussing, and they started experiencing. They were interviewing different people, and they were basically gathering knowledge about famine. So this is one sketch, rough sketch I drew, like the economic cycle at that time, which was running in Bengal. So here Diwan is at the top of the pyramid, and the Rayat Talukdar and the Jamidar is there, and Rayat Talukdar Patowari. They were farmers also, but rich farmers. And at the bottom level, you can see all the villages and the people, the artisans, and like people at the like they at the bottom of the economic pyramid. Even today, also like this section of the people are at the bottom of the economic pyramid. And there is one Shroff. Shroff are the bankers. So thing is, when East India Company came, or the other Europeans, they had to convert their money from the Shroff. And Shroff used to get lots of money, security money from them. So and that extra money rolled back to the Jamindar, Diwan, and finally to the Nawab of Delhi. So this is the cycle. What East India Company did, the first thing they did, they broke that cycle. And this is the fair page, like I used in the book. Previous one was the rough page. And this is the cycle the East India Company broke. How? They first attacked on the agrarian economy. So in Bengal economy was primarily agrarian, and peasant was the most important workforce. So from the Mughal period, there were two main classes of farmer, Khudkast and the Rayat Kast. The Khudkast were those farmers who had their own cow or bull, plug, and a small piece of land. They are the Khudkast. The Kast means farming, Khud means self. Rayati Kast farmers, they would work under a Rayat. The Rayat was kind of a small jamindars, okay, or the local Nawab, and they would get a share of the crops and a small wage. So during Akbar and Jahangir's rule, there were injunctions from the Mughal court that Khudkast farmer could not take over Rayat's land. So like you can see that like Khudkast were like since they have their own land, they could devote others' land, but from Mughal court there are injunction, you cannot do that. So here you can see like all the Mughals, which is like if you notice the sun of the Mughal empire is declining, and finally it's the evening. So here from during Akbar times and Jahangir times, of course they couldn't do that then, but slowly the rule got changed. And during the era of Aurangzeb, the system was on the decline. And by the time of Farooq Shah, when he was on the throne, the system totally collapsed. Like the big farmers, they basically devoured the small farmers. And small farmers, what they had to do for living, they became other workers like the miners, and like in any job section, like they get into, but they didn't have any skill. So they are like they become very vulnerable at that time. So East India Company's time escalated that problem. And here you can see, like in their travel, they are discussing here, and they are in the morning, they are traveling to a different village region. Another very important section was the weaver section. Okay, so like in Bengal, like the weaver, they used to produce different kind of cloths for the rich, for the very poor people. Uh, like here I have mentioned that different kind of clothes like malmal khas. Of course, like you can understand that is for the Nawab and the rich. Bafta is for the middle class people. Gamcha, like if anyone is from Bengal, like they can understand Gamcha is, and in Patna in Bihar area also, Gamcha is a very important cloth for them, like to wipe the waters, and for different reasons, Gamcha is very important. So there are different section of weavers, they could make that. But what happened at that time? East India Company dissolved one very important system, which is called, uh, their Dadni system. They abolished the Dadni system. So Dadnis were the one businessman, one group of businessmen. They took the contract from the East India Company, or those who want to buy, anyone, one from Jamidars want to buy the gamcha on the other cloths. And as per their contracts, the worker would produce the thing. Now we can tell that, well, what East India Company did, they abolished the thing, like the workers, they directly could sell their, weaver directly could sell their product to the company or the jamindars. So it seems that like it's very good thing, because the dadnis are the middlemen. But the problem is not at all a good thing, because suppose when like the what happened in our with our farmers, like when all the farmers can sell their goods to a big company, it's good, it sounds good. But the problem is big company only want the finest product. So there is the competition. All the other workers, all the other farmers, they automatically died, which exactly happened at that time. Here you can see the monopoly on silk. I have mentioned that within a small text box. So silk, of course, the silk, the Manmal khas, the silk from the Bangladesh, that became the most important thing to get sold in East India Company office in Britain. So all the other workers, they used to produce other kind of cheap clothes. They died, and like all other workers also, not only the weavers, that industry, the limestone worker, the blacksmith, the boat makers, all connected to the same system. Because in village economy, like it's kind of exchange economy even at that time was alive, and the East India Company completely abolished that system. And here you can see, like I have clearly drawn, like one is Malmal Khas, one is Bafta, and one is Goji. Goji is kind of gamcha kind of cloth, and the different kind of people they used to use that. You can see the Malmal Khas mainly used by the Nawabs and their queens. Bafta is Jamindars or the riots, like middle class in that economic system. And the Goji, which is like lower section of the people in the economic pyramid, they used to use that. And this is the huge cycle. Like every like section here, they are rangrage, they are adding colors, they are called rangrage, and finally they are selling to the dadni businessman. That cycle, I'm not telling that everyone was happy and it was completely flawless. The problem is but the beauty is there is a flow of money, at least within that system. East India Company completely abolished that. So this was the first attack they did on that, the agrarian economy and the artisanal culture. Then the second attack was of when there was a scanty rainfall, they created some artificial crisis. So this is the drawing of Muhammad Reza Khan. He was Muhammad Reza Khan was the Diwan of Dhaka at that time during the Bengal famine. This is his palace, and I was like, this is from my sketchbook. I was trying to like understand what does the building look like from historical, from investigating in historical documents and some drawings from the India office at British Library. So this is from my sketchbook. So here you can see like everyone is basically siphoning all the food grains into his palace. So This was the problem. So here you can, now you can understand, you can see that they were discussing, and Devdular Mitra is drawing. This scene is from the Odisha. Like if you are aware of the Odisha landscape, you can identify it. And they were discussing what happened. The Reza Khan's soldiers, they used to loot all the food grains. Anywhere is transferring to anywhere. And they used to deposit all the food grains and the rice into his palace. And Maharaj Nandakumar also had similar allegation against Reza Khan. It was documented by Hunter. And here is the map, like during famine, who is transferring food to where, like from the Rangpur to Kashim Bazar to Dhaka, Dinajpur, all these are the places in the Bengal province. Now some places are in West Bengal, in India. Now after partition, some places are in Bangladesh. But this was the map of like who is transferring food to where. But this is very important, the most important. Actually, when Bengal famine was at the Bengal was at the verge of famine, what British did, they siphoned most of the rice to the fort where their garrisons was. Like primarily, they siphoned to the Fort William, Calcutta. In 1770, like all the food grains were transported there from Dinajpur and the Murshidabad. Okay, now we can understand who was transferring those food grains. Of course, Reza Khan, he was the Jamindar. So, but the common people was suffering. But there was enough food. Now from Calcutta, it transferred to the St. George to Chennai. Now Chennai, at that time Madras province. And from Madras, it was siphoned to the Marlborough Fort in Sumatra. So they, just like Churchill did, even in the 1770, East India Company did the same thing. That's why people were in dearth of food. Now I'm coming into the last quarter of the talk, which is nature's fury, like which actually you cannot evade. So the thing is, so far what I have discussed, that East India Company was destroying the economic sector, the agrarian economy, and the artisanal culture. And in the comics, Devdular Mitra and William Hunter, they were experiencing the famine of Orissa, and they were discussing what could happen in Bengal in 1770, just when Sirajudollah lost the battle. So they were discussing, and the comics was going on this way. And they came to the conclusion that, well, of course, British East India Company was the main responsible agency in making the famine happen. And Jamindars and local Nababs, they were also, like, since they became puppet and East India Company became the Diwan, the tax collector, they had to collect the tax to maintain their Jamindari, to maintain their status and their lifestyle. They had to collect tax and they transferred the tax to the East India Company. And they had to say yes to the policy of the East India Company's policy, like dissolving all the century-old Rajni system and other system. But the thing is, like, of course, human cannot evade that. They cannot escape that, which is nature's fury. So far, what I have discussed, if it's happening even now in anywhere in world, the country or the region is at the verge of famine, at least in local pockets. When the nature's fury comes, the famine just happen. So all the stage is set up. The nature's fury is just the trigger to the famine. Like we have the idea that in general convention that when there is crop failure because of rainfall, because of not enough rainfall, famine happen, which is not true. The stage is set by a year after year destruction of the economic sector and the social sector. So here you can see Devdular Mitra and Hunter they are traveling around the field and around Midnapur and Orissa border. And Hunter is telling, it's true that local authorities and British both channelized food grain for their own purpose. But we cannot, that between 1767 and 1770, rainfall was scanty. We cannot tell that. So then they were discussing which region was hit mostly, where was the most casualties during famine of 1770. Okay, so it was Purnia district, like the Bihar and Nepal border. So it's documented by, it was in India office also, like they counted the number of death and loss of properties, and also in Hunter got that information from the official document, and he also mentioned that in his book. So here now they are discussing basically, like, and the case of Purnia is, like in Purnia, the dominating river is River Koshi, and the river used to change its course almost in every 5 or 6 years, and so there is flood in almost every year in Purnia region. And then when the flood is happened, all the sand, all the like farming lands are covered by sand, and actually even after good rainfall and flood, they actually couldn't produce rice and others, and so they had to migrate. Most of the people, even before the famine, they had to migrate to the Nepal, and during famine they were completely vulnerable, and the system was completely collapsed, and most of the people died there. So here they are discussing, like, I'm reading out. So Devdular Mitra is telling him, okay, so it's true that no one has control over nature, but man can read the signs of nature, and if they are respectful, can utilize it as a resource. Indigenous people had that knowledge. So they are discussing basically what happened to Purnia. Like, of course, we human cannot escape from the nature's fury, but indigenous people have that knowledge. So here I have used that book to get information about the Koshi River's changing course. So in that book, like from pre-1736 to the 1949, even after the independence, how the rivers changed its course. And you can see, like, even in the 18th century, the river changed a course in quite a lot. So then in the final chapter, we finally discussed then who survived. So what kind of lesson we can learn from that famine, and also in pandemics, because in pandemic, also in the pandemic time, in sitting in my house, I was drawing the famine. So I was eager to learn, like, the famine. Of course, even during the pandemic, the Food um, World Food Agency, they also announced that, like, some country in the world, just because of the pandemic, they're at the verge of famine. Also, they also got Nobel Peace Prize in 2020, I guess. So that question was in my mind, like, from whom we can learn, like, to survive. Then I found that actually it's slightly mentioned in Hunter's account, but not properly. But there's one professor in UK, his name is Vinita Damodaran. Vinita is one of the best environmental historian in world. So from her writing and analysis about the famine in 18th and 19th century Bengal, I came to know that, okay, at that time, in still that practice is alive. In South Bihar, there is a practice called Ahar Pine. So using that technique, actually the Pahadis, the tribes, they survived in the famine. So Ahar Pine is a century-old water restoring system. So here you can see, I took that image from, this is a current image from this government website. So Ahar is a reservoir, and Pine is the drainage system. So it's only using the natural slope of the land. So at that time, all the indigenous people, they had the knowledge about the slope of the land, and they used that. So they could restore the water. And it only happened in South Bihar just because of the slope of the land. In North Bihar, the border of the Nepal, the Purnia districts was there, it couldn't happen. So because the slope was different. So Pahadis, all the tribes, indigenous people from the Chotanagpur Plateau, at the time it was inside and the Bengal province, they survived the famine. And they also have some old Neolithic irrigation technique. Like, the British technique was quite modern. Like, you have to raise food, rice on that land, and it's fixed for rice. But in Neolithic technique, it is shifting landscape technique, and that knowledge was also used by the Pahadis and the tribes. In the shifting landscape technique, they never settle in one land for raising of rice or other foods. So it's kind of a feedback loop they maintain with the forest and the land for cultivating food grains. So they had that kind of knowledge at the time. So here Devdulal Mitra, of course, all these are imaginary. It's not written in Annals of Rural Bengal. So, but Devdulal Mitra is basically discussing these issues with Hunter, that if other region of Bengal, they actually could follow this kind of ancient technique. Of course, East India Company didn't allow to do that in rest of the Bengal, and famine hit them hard. But in Chotanagpur Plateau, the indigenous people, they actually survived. The irony is actually in 19th century, when it was a time of Hunter, he was living in 19th century. Slowly, East India Company devoured that Chotanagpur Plateau also. All those Paharis and those tribes, indigenous people, they become coolie. Basically, they took them as a coolie in, and then we all know that story. In 20th century, that Plateau, that become Bengalis and the elite Babu's favorite place to travel uh, and spend the holidays. So slowly that culture basically gone. But in 1770, the culture was alive and the tribes survived. So these are the like lesson I was also gaining. Like in pandemic, we saw that like Amazon was not delivering anything, but we actually by ourselves dismantled our local delivery system. We are depending on some food marts, like rice was not available there, but we forgot how to buy local foods from our local shopkeepers, and we basically like from our local farmers, like how to at least get food grains. We forgot that this kind of lessons. Like we become very modern, and when we become very modern, the pandemic hit us hard. So I got that connection from while drawing the famine. Like that similar kind of course, the outcome was not similar. Pandemic was caused by a deadly virus, but the socio-economic condition and the vulnerability of the human life, that was quite similar. And in both cases, it was done by some biased policy making. So here is like again how the um, shifting land cultivation has happened here. So the fallow land is basically it's the irrigation is done already. So now the forest, the grasses are growing here. Now the slash weeds, shrubs and grasses are coming into the land. Here land is in preparation. Another fallow land. This is present cultivated land. So this is the reach between two lands. So you can understand like within on one landscape. So how different area of the land is using. So landscape, how to use one landscape, the politics of the landscape was also very much important in famine. Of course, Hunter didn't documented that in that level, but since I got that liberty to draw comics, and I already created one imaginary character in the light of Dev Kumar Mitra, so I put those knowledge into that comics, and finally they discussed like who survived. Okay, thank you. So this is my last slide. So this is the book, just came out in a couple of months back. It's available in Amazon India, and like if you want to get that book, you can write to Jadavpur University Press also. So here, including this comics, there are other comics. There are another one comics done by me, which I uh, uh, didn't discuss today. But along with the Chiattur and Manvantar, the Great Bengal Famine, there are comics about 3-4 others famines done by others comics artists also, and some beautiful scroll painting on each famines done by the Potachitrakars. So I want to thank Professor Ayesha Mukherjee, who was the principal investigator of that project. Professor Abhijit Gupta is the director of Jadavpur University Press and publisher of that book, and he was also the co-PI of that project. Other editors are Professor Sujit Kumar Mandal and Shutokirti. Shutokirti did a wonderful job during that project, and she was a project assistant of that project at that time. Now she's doing PhD in University of Chicago, and Digital Humanities Lab for restoring all the data, the information, and making such a beautiful digital archive. So we had access to every document, and through them to the India office of British Library also. And finally, the designer of the book. This is a brilliantly designed book. All the comics we have drawn on paper with some watercolor color, and just we get them just to put in the book, which is not a very easy thing. Making a book is a different kind of talent it's needed. It's just brilliantly done by Kaushik Aki, Ananda Kirtania. Thank you so much. So this was my last slide. Now I'm open to question. So
Uh, Hi, Mr. Argha. Thank you for that presentation. Uh,
okay, thank you
I
so
have a
much.
question that's not specifically just about famine tales, but
Okay,
I'm also thinking about the short comic that you drew for the long form anthology, the second part of long form anthology, which is
okay,
Bose versus Bose.
okay,
I find like a couple of similarities when it comes to how you created a fictional character who's narrating actual, real events that have happened. Uh, I'm also thinking of how different Bose versus Bose was, because while it is a biography, you concentrate a lot on, say, magnifying natural processes, materials, substances, and that's something that you've been doing consistently through, your previous work. Also,
right,
Beware
right.
of Bubbles was also sort of like that. Uh, but over here you have like this whole element of biography that comes in, and uh, my question was, when you're using a lot of research for your work in terms of books or journal articles, etc., we know that journal articles and books come with a certain convention of
Right.
presentation, right? Like they have annotations, they have references, they have footnotes, etc. So since this whole series is based off on how the form has evolved, do you find like is there a certain grammar of drawing comics that are transcoding this sort of research into graphic form? Like, what do you do when you come across an annotation or a footnote that's half a page long, but you need to put that in there? And how do you this is of course a separate question. How do you draw that line between uh, biography and actually presenting research that's process based?
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, like I'm talking about the biography, so the Bose versus Bose. The Bose versus Bose is basically like I wanted to represent, of course, the research by Jagadish Chandra Bose, is a famous physicist, biologist, and I also did PhD from Bose Institute, so I had a personal connection with him. So, but like after reading all his biography, his letter to Rabindranath Tagore and others, his relationship with Swami Vivekananda, Sister Nivedita at that time, other like the spiritual movement was happening in India. So after reading all these things and his evolution of his own research, what I found the most interesting thing is there could be, if I was Jesse Bose, at least, there could be a tug of war between Jesse Bose, the physicist, and the Jesse Bose became after he actually left the physics research, following the Western kind of scientific practice, which was very objective. Now the things getting changed, many subjectivity are coming into, like people are more open, but at that time people were not open. It was quite positivist kind of scientific practice. What you can observe, you will document. And of course, the Eastern philosophy was quite against it. So when Jesse Bose, like in the latter half of his life, quite he was acting quite like a philosopher, and in the initial half of his life he was a objective physicist, like the West. So I wanted to reflect the tug of war between these two avatar of Jesse Bose. So here, if you have, it's good that like I'm happy that you have read that comics, But here, both the characters are Bose. They are the dialogue between his own self. So I was not interested in basically translating what is already written in prose, in like in biography or in research paper, review article, because it's already written. So what I, as in, like when I read that, and as in comic artist, what is my contribution? So I was always interested in creating a new kind of scholarship, like not translating what is written into illustrated form. I'm not interested in that. Similar thing like in Famine also, like of course, like if you read Annals of Rural Bengal, every detail with some historical analysis also, not only just data. Hunter documented that, but from that book, you can sense that Hunter was not very sure what are the reason of the famine. But I am, as an artist, and as a scholar, I am looking into the famine from 21st century. So, and also like Professor Amartya Sen and other scholars have done a brilliant work on famine. So after reading all these things, why should I depend on only the Hunter's account? Rather, I had created one model of famine, but keeping Hunter's data. So analysis is from the 21st century lens and using the modern scholar like Professor Amartya Sen, and the data I have used collected by the Hunter. So in this way, hybrid kind of model of famine I created in writing. The first I wrote, and I wrote many notes. Then I just translated that new model of famine, which was done by me, hybridizing Hunter's information and modern scholars' information, modern scholars' model about famine. Then I translated that hybrid model into the comics. That's I thought could be a new contribution in reading about famine. So my idea was, if someone is reading the comics, they wouldn't say, well, this is a very good or very bad, whatever comics version of famine wrote by others. Rather, well, from this comics, I can learn about famine. That was my agenda. Similarly, for the Bose also, like, of course, there are so many books, so many volumes, so many research papers wrote about Bose, wrote by Bose. So you can read that. Anyone can read that. But if someone is reading my comics, they would understand that, of course, there is a tension. It's not between between two Boses. It's between two kind of scientific philosophy, West and the East. So this was the the summary of that comics. The tension between two scientific philosophy, and no one is winning here. So I didn't took any side, like West is better or East is better.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much for asking this question. Hello, Suzanne.
Hi. Oh, this was so delightful. Thank you so much for this wonderful, wonderful talk.
Thank you, Suzanne.
I've been looking through your website too, and I'm struck by the fact that you choose different visual styles for your different comics. And
Yes.
You move from a kind of really beautifully lyrical style, for example, in your comics about embryology, to a sort of, you'd say, almost historical style, to clearly, vernacular Art Spiegelman, or even, and I wonder, I'd love you to talk about how you are doing a kind of interpretation of the material that you're putting into your comic in your choice of style, because it strikes me it gives you an additional layer as a cartoonist to inflect the message you're given.
Okay, so I would like to answer this question in this way. Like, I'm a big fan of Peter Gallison. Okay, so Peter Gallison is a science historian, and like he is brilliant in how to use visual in science and history of science. So actually, I follow his philosophies, and I'm a big fan of his book Objectivity. And I found, well, so Peter is a filmmaker, so he makes film on history of science, and I draw comics on history of science. So I thought what I can learn from him. In fact, in Harvard, we had a meeting also. I learned I asked him many questions about how actually we should use visuals in science. So when I draw comics, I do not think myself as a comics artist, rather as a science historian or historian whose dissemination process is comics. It's just the output is comics. Like instead of writing as a scholar who used to write, I draw comics. That's the only difference. Otherwise, there is no difference. So the different layer of visuals Peter used. Like one is the direct visuals. One is first layer of visuals, which is called he used to call primary visuals, like the data. If you are translating the data into visuals, this is one kind of data. So I use this kind of visuals. Another is secondary visuals, which is like on his own merit, the visual is very aesthetically good. Like he used this kind of visuals in his documentary. So I also use this kind of visuals. There is tertiary visuals. Since he used documentary, so he directly captured people and the laboratory situation and the landscape, the whole backdrop in real through camera. But I am a cartoonist, I am a comics artist, I had to draw it. So another layer I add than Peter, that how I had to decide what kind of style I have to choose. Then the choosing style. So here I follow the philosophy of Spiegelman. So in one interview, Spiegelman told that, look, so it's not true that this is the style of that comics artist. Rather, what your story demands, you have to choose that style. You have to modify that. So I try to do that. I cannot say that I do that properly because I am still in learning phase. But I at least try to follow these two people's philosophy.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And it's so great to encounter a science studies person here. I love it.
Thank you, Susan.
Can I ask you one more question?
Yeah, please.
Thank you. The other person I just find I'm thinking of the whole time is, and I talked about this in the last talk too, the work of the landscape architect Anuradha Madar. She has a whole series of books about rivers, Delta Deccan traverses. She has one on, and what she does is work with the visuals of a river changing its course and then build up textures. And I just wondered, has she got any play? Have you come across her work at all? If not, I really recommend it.
Actually, no. So can you please tell her name so that I can?
Yeah, it's Anuradha Mathur, and she's no longer alive, but she was a landscape architect at the University of Pennsylvania from India, and much of her work was done in India. Really brilliant writer and scholar.
No, thank you so much for this. I didn't see her work, but thank you so much.
I can put more information on Facebook for you.
Yeah. Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
Hello, Mr. Manna. I had a question.
Yes.
You mentioned the Illustrated London News and Punch. Punch started publication in 1841, and the Illustrated London News a year later in 1842. And the mid-19th century was also the great age of the illustrated periodical in Britain, and all the various incarnations of Punch in various Indian languages, like the Awadh Punch or the Delhi Punch.
Right, Awadh Punch.
So, as part of your reference, you mentioned the Hunter text, which is also in the mid-19th century. So as part of your reference, did you also refer to these illustrated periodicals? Because I'm sure if you're looking at the 1770s, there were very few, if at all, any illustrated periodicals in Britain itself. And 1770 is also a decade before before 1780, when India's first English newspaper, Hickey's Bengal Gazette, came into existence. So was the illustrated? So did you also one part of the question is, did you also refer to 19th century illustrated periodicals? And the second part is, if you did, were these the first real pictorial references to vulnerability or famine that you found in the annals of British India?
Yeah, brilliant question. Yes, actually in the comics, I extensively used that. Like in the whole comics, the concept is that actually, since they are photographers, and like many people are at that time using daguerreotype photography, which is not very good photography. Their photographers came. Also another newspaper also came. It's called Le Petit Journal from France. Their production was better than the British, and they started early the color lithography production. So, and British people, they are basically was depending on some daguerreotype photography. then redrawing that on some etching plates and some other. So this was their production process. And yes, their team came to document the Odisha famine, the Midnapur famine. And if you search even in Google, you can find many like half photograph, half drawing kind of documents published at the time in those newspaper. So yes, their team came, and my comic start in that philosophy, since their team was coming here, and of course they would publish articles in Illustrated London. So Hunter was getting the offer from Englishman newspaper. Of course, this is imaginary. He got the offer, but of course, the Englishman never published anything, any illustrated news on famine. But here is the like philosophy. Here was my imagination and my logic to bring the character Debdulal Mitra. They were discussing every time, and even in some panels I drew that also, like they were moving inside village, and the other newspaper, the journalist and the photographers from the other newspaper, actually they were taking the pictures. And there you can find many pictures in internet and in websites. All those pictures was kind of like very mechanical, like it's not naturally captured. Like the photographers asked everyone to stand in a row and they captured. So this kind of thing I have also drawn. And finally, I redraw some panels, some front cover pages to give the sense to the reader that this thing was happening. So yeah, this is very good observation by you. And yes, I have done that. I have used that thing. And the second one is like in which newspaper I have found the first one, the first image they published, which actually I cannot tell you properly, but 3 newspaper I have in Punch, of course. In Punch they published one, but of course it was published in Britain. Like their team didn't come, so the news was floating from India to the Britain, and some good people, of course, they are also angry on East India Company. They mocked the East India Company on that. There was one magazine called Graphic Magazine. Their team produced some really brilliant illustrations, and Illustrated London, of course, published on Odisha Famine and Lepeti Journal. It's all around like 1860 to 1870 they published. But yeah, like who was the first one, actually I cannot tell. But these are the journal they published, like in the gap of 1 or 2 years. They published many news and illustrated news on that.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Yeah, any other question? There are no questions for.
The floor is still open to questions and comments from the audience. Could be a comment, a response.
Yeah, someone commented in chat box. Thank you, Sangeeta. Thank you for your comment.
If you have no more questions, may I invite the project assistant of the UNESCO Chair in Vulnerability Studies, Dr. Meenakshi Srihari, to deliver a formal vote of thanks.
Right. Thanks, Atul, and thank you very much, Mr. Argha Manna, for taking us through the process of really how history can be remediated into the graphic novel form, and specifically, of course, through the story world of Famine Tales. And we were also struck by how you use the double lens of vulnerability as accorded to the event by using the pandemic as one of your frames, and by using a fictional character as both, witness and narrator to this world that you created. Thank you so much for joining us today. I would also like to thank everybody else who's joined us. One of our speakers, Professor Susan Squire, is here. As always, thank you to Professor Nair and Professor Kurian for coordinating the event. Our next talk will be on April 17th, where we will have Professor Susan Squire talk about locating health in vulnerability. She's going to be talking to us about graphic medicine. We hope to have a good audience for that as well. So please do join us. We will be putting out the posters soon. Thank you again to all of you for joining us today. Thank you, Mr. Argha, again.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.